Welcome back to my channel. It's been a while, but now I'm back and I'm going to do what I said I would do previously, and that is rank the albums of the Moody Blues. Now, the way that I rank albums is based upon my personal preference. It is not a universal ranking. Don't really take into consideration album sales, anything of that nature. This is about me and what I put on from this particular artist to listen to most. So we're going to go ahead and get started with the Moody Blues. They have 16 albums, and we're going to start with number 16, and this is called December, 2003. This is a holiday-themed album, Christmas album. It's sort of a mix of some new songs and some covers, and it's got a very wintry, very pleasant atmosphere to the album. I really enjoy Christmas music and sort of the feel of the season, and so this album qualifies for that as far as I'm concerned. And I've always considered the Moody Blues would be perfect for a Christmas album anyways. It doesn't really show off the band's prog chops as much, but it's still a decent album to listen to, especially around Christmas. My favorite song off this album is December Snow, but I recommend giving it a spin. You may enjoy it. If you like Christmas music, you probably will. So that's number 16, December. Number 15 is the 1991 album Keys of the Kingdom. Now, this was sort of a challenging period for the band, and the album features a significant lineup change. It's not as cohesive as you would think the Moody Blues albums would be, in contrast to the albums that we'll speak about later. But it does offer a few memorable tracks. I think Say It With Love, Bless the Wings That Bring You Back. Those two tracks I think are solid. And so that would kind of, the only reason that I rank this over December is because December is sort of a holiday album, and this one is, you can listen to pretty much any time. But it's number 15, Keys of the Kingdom. Number 14 is called Strange Times, and it's 1999. This album sort of marked a return to some of the classic Moody Blues sounds, some of those elements. But I think that it failed to capture the magic of the Moody Blues in their prime. But it's still very notable. It's a sound effort, I'll put it that way. Some of my favorites are English Sunset and Haunted off this album. Next is going to be number 13, and that's The Present, and it came out in 1983. This album sort of struggled to maintain the momentum that they had established with Long Distance Voyager, which we'll talk about later. But it still features some very quality music, I feel. But it's sort of, to me, it's sort of like there's a dip in creativity there with the Moody Blues, with this album. Whereas Long Distance Voyage was an album that had some heavy hitters on it, so to speak. This album doesn't really have that as much, but I do think it has some highlights, and I'd say Blue World and Sitting at the Wheel. Next is going to be number 12, and that's Octave, 1978. This is their reunion album after sort of a long hiatus, not really long, but it's more of a transitional album, and it does have some very interesting tracks on it, but it lacked sort of that Moody Blues feel, that the cohesion of their earlier records. The highlights from this album, or the songs that I enjoy personally, would be Steppin' in a Slide Zone and Driftwood. Next is going to be number 11, Sur la Mer. That's 1988. And in the 80s, a lot of these bands from the 70s had to change their sound in order to remain relevant. So the Moody Blues were no exception. They also had to alter their sound a bit, become a little bit more mainstream, a little bit more commercial, a little bit more of the time. So that's what they did. So this can kind of, because it was in 88, it continues that 80s sound, the lush production, catchy, radio-friendly songs, but it's not as impactful, I think, as another album from the 80s that I'll mention here in a few minutes. But it still resonates with the fans, especially fans of the 80s Moody Blues. The tracks that stick out to me the most would be I Know You're Out There Somewhere and No More Lies. Next will be number 10, and it's 1965's The Magnificent Moodies. This is the debut album from the Moody Blues, and it is a completely different Moody Blues than you've come to know. It's basically sounds more like a late 50s or early 60s R&B band. And there's no real standout tracks on it. I mean, there is a hit song on the album, but when I say standout, nothing that sounds too different than the other songs on the album. Go Now was the hit, but I prefer a song on the album called Something You Got. However, I do enjoy Go Now as well. Number 9 is going to be The Other Side of Life, and this is that 80s album I was talking about, 1986. This album embraced that 80s pop and synth style. It achieved mainstream mega success, especially with the hit song Your Wildest Dreams. It sort of was the way Yes was in the 80s. It was sort of divisive. Some fans from the 70s, Yes did not like 80s Yes, and same goes for the Moody Blues. Some fans from the Moody Blues who enjoyed that classic Moody Blues sound did not like the 80s version of Moody Blues. But I enjoyed it. I think it was really a significant leap for the band to continue to be relevant in that period of time. So I do enjoy Wildest Dreams. I do enjoy The Other Side of Life, another track off that, which is the title track. Next, we're going to go to Long Distance Voyager. This was 1981. So again, this is the first album after the band's 1978 reunion. And this is where they adapted that sound, the 80s sound, blending sort of the 80s synths and the classic Moody Blues harmonies. It was a commercial success. The highlights were The Voice. To me, I really like that one. Gemini Dream and In My World. And there's a host of other ones, but those will just they'll be the ones that I give to you. Next, number 7 is Every Good Boy Deserves Favor, 1971. This one has very complex arrangements, and it's a return to a more elaborate production from what they had went to. I'll talk about that album, the album previous, in just a minute. This album sort of balances the band's orchestral ambitions, which they had a lot, if you listen to some of the earlier albums, with a more accessible songwriting. I enjoyed The Story in Your Eyes, My Song, and After You Came. Those tracks stick out to me on this album the most. Next is number 6, which is going to be A Question of Balance, 1970. So this album took a more stripped down approach from the previous albums, more bombastic, sort of epic orchestra type sound. This is more of a stripped down approach, aiming for more of a live feel to the album. It remains like a politically charged sort of album, and to me, I'm not really into that as much. I mean, Pink Floyd had things like that with, say, Animals, which I really love. That's my favorite Pink Floyd album. But this album is a strong album, not as epic as what you would think the Moody Blues would sound like it during that time. I enjoyed the song Question. I enjoyed Melancholy Man. I enjoyed How It Is We Are. How Is It We're Here? I'm sorry. Several songs off this album. We're going to move on to number 5, and this is called On the Threshold of a Dream, 1969. This album is sort of a continuation of the band's exploration of complex themes that they had prior to this album. Again, those sort of expansive soundscapes, the poetic feel to the album, atmosphere to the album. It solidified their reputation in prog rock, I really feel like this one did. It features like a strong songwriting collaboration, and it had it was like an immersive listening experience, and that's the way the Moody Blues are to me. I feel as though they are an immersive listening experience. It's like you can sit down, put on the record or however you listen to your music, and enjoy a journey. And that's what the Moody Blues, especially the early Moody Blues, offers to the listener. And this album is no exception. It also has a little Beatles feel to it in certain areas on this album. Lovely to See You, Have You Heard, Send Me No Wine. Great tracks. This is a great album. Highly recommend this album, and especially if you like the Beatles as well. I think you'll enjoy this one. Number 4 is going to be Seventh Sojourn, and this is 1972. This is usually ranked a little lower for most people, but for me, I really enjoyed it. It does have a darker tone, some introspective lyrics. It was the band's last album, actually, before their hiatus that I spoke of. I also feel like because of that, it sort of reflects the band's fatigue, but also how creative they got, when they have these moments that they could use this negative, maybe that's why it's a little darker, to create something brilliant, and I believe this album is. Isn't Life Strange is a great song off this album. New Horizons, wonderful. Lost in a Lost World, brilliant album. Seventh Sojourn, 1972. Now number 3. To Our Children's Children's Children. This is a conceptual album. It's inspired by the moon landing. You know how the prog artists are very strange, what some of the inspirations that they have. It features, it's very rich, very spacey. It's the thematic depth of the Moody Blues. I mean, especially during that time, they were so cinematic in their sound. Their sound was so, it was almost like in watching a movie, except for you're listening to it. Very cinematic. To me, and this one, sort of explores the themes of humanity overall and exploration, and a really, really, really solid album. I don't know if I'd quite call it a masterpiece album, but it's up there. Gypsy's great, Higher and Higher, Beyond. I mean, really every song on this album is really good. So check it out. Number 2 is In Search of the Lost Chord, 1968. The band moved from orchestral arrangements from their album prior to this one to this, they were performing themselves mostly and experimenting with a wide range of sounds. So including the mellotron. They used a mellotron, sort of like King Crimson did. They were using it. They actually used it a year earlier because this album came out in '68. In Accord with the Crimson King came out in '69. But this one is very spiritual, I guess, is how I would describe it. Again, introspective. It's very mystical, and the songs off of it are just phenomenal. Ride My Seesaw, Best Way to Travel, just a great song. And Legend of a Mind about Timothy Leary, the 1960s LSD guru. But the album overall is just a fantastic prog psychedelic masterpiece of an album. And now we're going to get to number 1. And this is probably no surprise. It's probably number 1 on several people's lists. Days of Future Past, 1967. This album is the second album by the Moody Blues. And the leap from the first album, Magnificent Moody's, to this one is a paradigm shift. I mean, incredible progressive leap to this. This album is considered to be the pinnacle of the Moody Blues work, and it's a landmark album in rock and progressive rock and psychedelic rock. So it's an all-encompassing album. It is one of the first rock albums to incorporate a full orchestra, blending classical music with rock music, and all kinds of elements, poetry as well in this. This includes the iconic hit song Nights in White Satin. I love that song. It's one of my favorite songs. But it not only does it have that song, it also has Tuesday Afternoon, Twilight Time, and the piece is describing an entire day in the album. It's a journey of an entire day from morning until nighttime. Beautiful album, beautiful poetry, very, very tight musicianship. Fantastic album, a masterpiece. Moody Blues, The Days of Future Past. So if you haven't heard that album, I'm going to tell you, stop whatever you're doing and go get it and listen to it. So until next time, you guys take care.